All right, so get ready, because today we're diving deep, really deep into, well, one of the most, I think, thought-provoking myths out there. It's the story of Sisyphus. You might have heard of him, that guy from Greek mythology, always pushing that boulder up a hill.
Mhm.
But I got to tell you, there's way more to this story than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about some really heavy stuff here, like what's the nature of punishment? And then there's this whole idea of futility, like what's the point of it all? And honestly, it all boils down to this question of what it actually means to be human. Things that, let's face it, they're just as relevant today as they were back then, centuries ago.
No doubt, this isn't just some dusty old myth.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating to me is how differently Sisyphus's story has been interpreted over time. We can look at it as like a straight up morality tale from the ancient Greeks, but then you've got the existentialists like Camus who saw it as a symbol of, well, the absurd hero, and you can even find reflections of our own internal struggles in it.
I like that, the internal struggles. Okay, but before we get too deep into all that, let's back up a bit.
Hmm.
Who was this Sisyphus guy anyway? And what exactly did he do to get stuck with this never-ending workout routine?
Right. So Sisyphus, well, the funny thing is, even the ancient sources don't totally agree on what kind of guy he was. We know he was the king of Ephyra, which later became Corinth.
Okay, king, got it.
And he was famous, or maybe infamous is a better word, for his cunning, his ambition.
Ambitious king, all right.
Some sources make him sound like a pretty wise ruler, someone who really boosted trade and helped his kingdom prosper. But then others say he was totally ruthless, even went so far as to break those sacred laws of hospitality.
Hold on, violating hospitality. What do you do? Like, refuse to offer his guests snacks or something?
Aha! I wait. No, we're talking about something way more serious, like, well, tilling them.
Whoa, okay, definitely not a good host.
Yeah, not exactly. But, let's get to the really juicy stuff, the stuff that really landed him in hot water for all eternity. I
Yeah.
mean, Sisyphus was a master trickster, and his most famous stunt, no question, was cheating death. And get this, he did it twice.
Wait, twice?
Yeah.
This guy had some serious issues with authority, didn't he?
Oh, he did. So the first time, he actually managed to capture Thanatos,
Thanatos, as in,
the personification of death himself. I mean, can you imagine the chaos?
yeah, no one dying, ever.
Exactly. Total pandemonium. It got so bad that Ares, the god of war, he had to step in and like wrestle Thanatos away from Sisyphus.
So Sisyphus actually put a stop to death itself. I mean, that's pretty bold.
Oh, incredibly bold. But the second time he cheated death, well, that was a whole other level of trickery.
Okay, I'm hooked. What did he do?
He managed to convince Hades, the god of the underworld, to let him go back to the land of the living.
Back from the underworld.
Yep. And you want to know his excuse?
Lay it on me.
He said he needed to, get this, scold his wife
Scold his wife.
because she wasn't performing the proper burial rites for him. The irony being, of course, that he'd specifically told her not to do any of that.
Oh, wow. Talk about manipulation. He really thought he could pull one over on the gods, huh?
Yeah, he really did. And cheating death wasn't even the only time he messed with them.
Seriously.
He also betrayed Zeus, spilled the beans to the river god Asopus about Zeus kidnapping Aegina,
Oh, so he was a snitch, too.
basically. He got a pretty sweet reward for that, though, a spring on the Acropolis.
Nice.
But you don't want to mess with Zeus.
No, you don't.
Zeus's anger, well, let's just say it lasted a lot longer than that spring water.
I bet. Okay, so we've got this king, right? Total manipulator, cheats death not once but twice, betrays the king of the gods. Sounds like he was kind of asking for it, don't you think?
Well, he certainly wasn't making things easy on himself.
So what was his punishment? What did the gods cook up for him?
Picture this. Sisyphus, sent to Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld.
Not a good place to be.
Definitely not. And his punishment, his eternal sentence, to roll this massive boulder up a steep hill.
Okay, sounds tough.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe it's a good way to get ripped, right?
Maybe. But here's the catch. Every single time he gets to the top, just when he's about to, taste victory, that boulder rolls right back down to the bottom.
Right. That's rough.
And he has to start all over again. Forever.
Man, talk about adding insult to injury. That's not just hard labor. It's like the ultimate definition of futility.
Exactly. That endless cycle, all that effort, and then, bam, back to square one. It's powerful imagery, right?
No wonder this myth has stuck around for so long. Makes you think.
For sure. So what strikes you about this punishment? When you hear about Sisyphus and that boulder?
I think what gets me is that feeling of being trapped. Like you're in this endless loop. You can't escape. I mean, we've all had those moments, right?
Yeah.
Deadlines at work, bills piling up, that never-ending to-do list.
Yeah.
You work and work and work, but it feels like you're barely making a dent.
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes this myth so relatable. It connects Sisyphus's struggle to something we all experience. That human experience of feeling stuck sometimes.
Totally.
But, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. There are so many different ways to understand this myth. People have been interpreting it for centuries.
Okay, so let's get into that.
Yep.
What are some of the deeper meanings behind Sisyphus and his boulder? Okay, so we know Sisyphus was a pretty cunning king, but he really messed with the gods and ended up with that eternal boulder-pushing punishment. But I'm curious about something. How did the ancient Greeks, I mean, the people who first told this story, how did they interpret it? Was it like a don't be a jerk to Zeus kind of thing?
Oh, for sure. It was definitely a warning. For them, Sisyphus was all about hubris.
Hubris.
Yeah, that excessive pride.
Oh, okay.
That arrogance that made him think he could actually outsmart the gods. And his punishment, well, it was a pretty stark reminder of what happens when you overreach, when you think you can, like, defy fate and get away with it.
So a lesson in humility then. But you mentioned earlier that there are other ways to see this myth. Like, what about the existentialist perspective? That always seemed pretty interesting to me.
Right. Existentialism. Well, Albert Camus, the philosopher, he had this really unique take on Sisyphus. He didn't see him as a victim, not at all. For Camus, Sisyphus was an absurd hero.
An absurd hero.
Yeah, and it was Sisyphus's awareness of his situation, the fact that his task was completely futile. That's what made his defiance so powerful, according to Camus.
Well, it's not about reaching the top of the hill. It's more about how you push that boulder.
Exactly. Camus believed that real freedom comes from recognizing that life is kind of absurd.
Absurd hell.
Like, it doesn't inherently have meaning.
Okay, I think I get it.
And then once you accept that absurdity, you choose to rebel against it.
Rebel against meaninglessness.
Right. And for Sisyphus, his rebellion is in that constant effort.
Like, even though it's pointless, he keeps pushing.
Exactly. He refuses to give up. He refuses to fall into despair. Camus even wrote this famous line, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy."
Imagine Sisyphus happy. Wow, that's really powerful. It's like, even when you're facing something totally futile, you can still choose how you react to it,
Yeah.
You find meaning in the struggle itself.
Absolutely.
It makes me think about those times when I feel stuck. Like I'm pushing that boulder uphill and getting nowhere.
Right.
It happens to everyone.
It does. That's the beauty of this myth, I think. It speaks to that universal experience. Everyone faces setbacks, everyone runs into obstacles.
Yeah, it's true.
But the myth also offers a glimmer of hope. It reminds us that we have the power to choose how we respond to those challenges.
So we're not just victims of circumstance.
Exactly.
We can find our own purpose, even when things seem meaningless. It's like, even though we know that boulder is going to roll back down, there's something almost noble about continuing to push it uphill.
Yeah.
It's an act of defiance, like saying, I won't let this meaningless task define me. I'll find my own meaning.
I love that. It's a powerful way to look at it.
And it brings up another interesting interpretation, right? What about the psychological angle? Like Sisyphus's eternal task. Maybe it represents our own internal struggles.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Those negative thoughts that keep coming back, the bad habits we just can't seem to break. It can feel like we're pushing that boulder uphill over and over again.
Only to watch it roll back down. Yeah, I've been there.
We've all been there. But just like Sisyphus, we have a choice. We can give up or we can keep pushing. We can keep striving to overcome those obstacles, even the ones inside us.
I like that. It's like the myth is acknowledging that struggle is just part of being human. But it's also saying, hey, don't give up, be resilient.
Exactly.
Even when it feels impossible.
And sometimes the process, the act of striving itself, it can be more meaningful than actually reaching the top of the hill.
Wow, that's deep. This is also fascinating. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. Is there anything else we should keep in mind about Sisyphus?
Well, it's important to remember that the myth itself has changed over time. There are different versions, different interpretations.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some stories focus on how clever Sisyphus was, even though they condemn his deception. And others highlight his love for life, his refusal to just give in to death.
So the myth is kind of like a rolling boulder itself, huh? It keeps evolving, picking up new layers of meaning as it goes.
I love that analogy. And I think that's what makes these ancient myths so powerful.
They're still relevant today.
Exactly. They give us a way to think about those big questions,
Life, death, what it means to be human.
Yeah, all the important stuff.
And speaking of big questions, I can't help but wonder, if I were Sisyphus, standing at the bottom of that hill, boulder waiting for me, what would I do? Would I try to find joy in the struggle, like Kemma said?
Sure.
Would I just get angry and rage against it all? Or maybe would I try to be even more clever than Sisyphus? Find a way to outsmart the system, some kind of loophole in those underworld rules.
That's a fantastic question, and a perfect way to lead into the final part of our deep dive. Let's explore those possibilities and more as we try to unravel the mystery of Sisyphus and his boulder.
So we're back and still thinking about Sisyphus.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been unpacking this ancient story, trying to figure out what it all means. And it's pretty amazing how a story about a guy and a boulder can get us thinking about how we live our own lives.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? How much this one myth can make us think about. Well, how we deal with challenges, how we handle those moments when things just don't go our way.
Right, and last time we were talking about, well, what if we were Sisyphus? How would we approach this whole eternal boulder-pushing situation?
It's a tough question, isn't it? It really makes you think about how you see challenges in your own life. Are they these huge roadblocks, or are they chances to learn and grow?
Or maybe even find some joy in the struggle, like Kama said.
Exactly.
So let's try this. Imagine we're Sisyphus. We're standing there at the bottom of that hill in Tartarus, boulder right in front of us. What are we thinking?
Well, if I were Sisyphus, honestly, I think my first move would be to take a good look at the situation, Like, what kind of boulder are we talking about here? Is it all rough and jagged, or is it surprisingly smooth? How steep is this hill, really?
So you're not just going to start pushing blindly.
No way. Gotta be strategic, right? Figure out the challenge before you jump in.
I like that. Be smart about it.
Exactly. And while I'm checking out the boulder, I'd be looking around too. See if
Yeah.
there's anything in the environment I could use.
Like tools or something?
Yeah, maybe a strong branch for leverage, or even just a different angle to approach the hill from.
It's funny, the myth never actually says Sisyphus has to use his hands.
That's true.
Maybe he could build a ramp or something.
Or some kind of contraption to help him roll the boulder.
Who knows what's possible in the underworld, right?
Exactly. The myth leaves room for creativity, for finding new solutions.
And that's a good lesson for us too, right? When we hit those roadblocks in life, we got to remember there might be other ways around them.
Absolutely. Think outside the box.
So we've got the strategy part down. But what about the mental game? Are we just going to be miserable forever pushing this boulder with gritted teeth?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember Camus and that whole imagine Sisyphus happy idea?
Yeah.
Maybe, just maybe, there's a way to find some joy in this whole thing.
But how? It's still the same builder, the same hill, the same endless cycle.
True. But what if? What if, instead of focusing on how pointless it all seems, Sisyphus focused on the physical experience? Like how it feels to push that boulder, the sun on his skin, the wind. Maybe he could even find a rhythm in his movements, a kind of peace in the repetition.
I see what you're saying. It's like turning this punishment into a mindfulness exercise, right? Paying attention to the little things you might normally miss.
Right. And hey, maybe after a while, Sisyphus even starts to feel a connection to that boulder. It becomes his companion, the one constant thing in his crazy world.
I like that. It's all about perspective, isn't it? Finding those little bits of beauty and meaning in the middle of something that seems impossible.
Yeah.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I mean, we
Yep.
started with ancient Greece, then we talked about existentialism, and now we're talking about how we deal with our own struggles.
It all connects, doesn't it?
It really does.
And through it all, I think the myth of Sisyphus gives us this framework for understanding how we face challenges.
Yeah, like a blueprint for resilience.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that even when things seem hopeless, we still have a choice. We can give in to despair, we can rebel against it all, or we can try to find a different kind of meaning, a different kind of joy in that endless cycle.
And in the end, it's that choice that defines us.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the myth of Sisyphus. We hope it's given you some things to think about, some new ways to approach those challenges in your own life.
Remember, even when you feel like you're pushing that boulder uphill, you have the power to choose your attitude, to find your own meaning. And maybe, just maybe, to imagine yourself happy.